Welcome to Triple C Stories. Get ready for thrilling African folktales filled with wisdom, adventure, and unforgettable lessons. Don't just watch, like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories alive.
The sun rose gently over the farm estate, casting golden light on the red earth paths between rows of humble staff quarters. Inside a small weathered house with peeling white paint and a lopsided wooden gate, the morning had already begun. Ruth Olayemi stood barefoot in the kitchen, her scarf slipping as she flipped sizzling akara in a well-worn frying pan. The aroma of bean paste and hot oil crept through the house, gently rousing 12-year-old Mercy from beneath her faded Ankara bedsheet. In the next room, her little brother John was already up, brushing his teeth with his usual enthusiasm, stealing quiet moments before the day's bustle. Their home, though modest with its stained cement floor and pencil-marked walls, gleamed with care. Ruth cleaned daily, singing hymns as she worked, and Gabriel, their quiet yet dependable father, often followed behind, adjusting wall calendars and wiping smudges from switches. A trusted account officer at the estate's farm, his tired eyes carried kindness, and his dignity filled the house more fully than wealth ever could. That morning, the family gathered around their rickety plastic dining table, sharing laughter, teasing, and warm akara dipped in pap. Mercy complained about John's slurping, and Ruth responded with affectionate scolding. Gabriel, flipping through his newspaper, chuckled and joined in, prompting a playful height contest against the wall. Laughter echoed through the house, the kind that etched itself into memory. As breakfast ended, Gabriel slung on his bag, kissed Ruth's cheek, and promised an early return after checking a farm site. He saluted Mercy, tousled John's hair, and stepped into the waking estate, where radios hummed gospel tunes and neighbors swept their yards. Mercy watched from the window, soaking in the stillness of the moment. A simple day, quietly perfect, like holding something warm and breakable in her hands. The rains had come early that year, soft and persistent, turning the red earth into thick mud and clinging to the tin roofs without drama. In the dim morning light, Ruth watched Gabriel tie his shoes on the edge of their damp, cramped bedroom, mildew darkening the walls and silence pressing around them. He looked older that morning, his posture slightly collapsed, and though he smiled, his usual gentle smoothing smile, something in Ruth's chest tightened. He kissed her cheek, whispered about a late meeting, and reached for his worn leather satchel. As he stepped over Mercy's sandals and John's bottle on the floor, Ruth followed him to the door. Outside, the children were barefoot in the drizzle, laughing like small birds. Gabriel paused, eyes soft as he looked at them, then turned back to Ruth with a quiet, unspoken plea in his eyes. She nodded, sealing the moment as he disappeared through the gate. Later, the children rushed in soaked, chattering and unapologetic. Ruth dried them off, scolded gently, and marveled at the spark in Mercy, her bold storytelling scribbled in the margins of notebooks, and John's endless questions. Despite the leaking roof, stitched sandals, and unpaid school fees, Ruth kept moving forward, walking to work in borrowed slippers, sometimes barefoot, always holding on to strength the way Gabriel did, silently and completely. Evenings were sacred. No matter how thin the soup or how frayed the clothes, they carved out peace. Ruth sat with the children by the hissing lantern, reviewing schoolbooks and stories. Mercy's handwriting shimmered in the yellow light while John eagerly read aloud. When Gabriel returned, sometimes early enough to sit with them, his weariness melted in their presence. On good nights, he read Mercy's favorite stories, their little room transforming into a kingdom. But on others, he came home late, eyes red, shoulders sagging, and head pounding. He never complained. He ate what was left, sat beside Ruth, and let silence speak for them both. She noticed the quiet pain, how he winced while removing his shoes or leaned too long against the doorframe. A small notebook appeared in his bag, filled with numbers and lists she didn't question. Instead, she offered what she could: water, gentle hands, whispered prayers folded into pillow seams. In the kitchen, on the bus, between the children's clothes. Not loud prayers, but fierce, quiet ones. Prayers to hold everything together. Sundays still glowed in the Olayemi household, a ritual of unity despite worn clothes and weary feet. The family walked to church together, dressed in patched and polished vests. Mercy in a resized hand-me-down, John in an oversized shirt, Ruth with oil-shined shoes, and Gabriel in a collar sewn back into shape. His hand rested gently on Ruth's back as the children skipped ahead. Church was Ruth's sanctuary, where she could cry during hymns and let herself feel. After service, they'd sit under a tree sharing puff-puff, their laughter warm and easy. Gabriel always watched them like he was photographing them with his soul. That Sunday, Mathew, Gabriel's bright-eyed junior colleague, joined them. He brought smiles, silly jokes, and silent reverence for Gabriel's quiet strength. On the walk home, Gabriel confided in Mathew about late salaries and growing pressure at work. Mathew offered concern, but Gabriel brushed it off, saying he had strong shoulders and a strong woman. Ruth blushed at his words, her heart both full and heavy, not knowing how deeply they'd echo hours later. That evening, the house filled with a slow, aching tension. Rain whispered on the rooftops as Ruth paced the parlor, her hands trembling as she re-cleaned the already spotless table. Mercy, still in her damp school uniform, waited silently, and John drew airplanes on the floor beside a flickering lantern. By 8, Ruth's fear became real. Gabriel had never been this late. The phone was dead. Mercy quietly reheated his food while Ruth kept glancing at the clock, praying in silence without words. Then, past 10, a knock at the gate came, not Gabriel's. A young man from his office stood in the rain, eyes wide, voice breaking. There'd been an accident on the expressway. Gabriel's ID was found, but no body yet. Ruth didn't collapse. She simply nodded, closed the door, and leaned on it for balance. Mercy stood frozen. John stirred awake, asking if Daddy was home. Ruth smiled, not from joy, but from the strength required to not shatter. She returned Gabriel's uneaten food to the kitchen, gathered John into her arms, and held her children through the storm of what they now knew. The mornings in the Olayemi home had lost their music. No more akara, no more humming, just silence that draped over everything like dust. Mercy woke first now, moving gently through the dim house filled with kerosene and sorrow. Ruth barely stirred, often lying still in bed, scarf loose, eyes blank, tapping the bed frame in rhythm like a ghost still clinging to routine. She no longer dressed the children or asked about school. Mercy did it all, prepared watery pap, washed John's face, and pretended not to see the hole in his shirt. At school, Mercy sat silent and distant, her once bright notebooks now half filled. She heard the cruel whispers about her mother, that she had gone mad, that she spoke to graves. Mercy said nothing. But one evening, she came home to find Ruth smiling on the floor, proudly showing off broken glass and can lids as treasures. Mercy took the mirror shard from her trembling hand and said they were beautiful. Voice cracking, heartbreaking. That night, as John slept, Mercy sat wide-eyed under the flickering bulb, knowing deep down that this wasn't something time or food could fix. Something in her mother was slipping, and Mercy didn't know how to hold it all together. Ruth's unraveling grew quieter but more terrifying. She began talking to furniture, waving at invisible people, wandering barefoot through the street. Neighbors gossiped, a few prayed. Her job stopped, the letters came, and Ruth tore them apart, convinced they were after her soul. Mercy just picked up the scraps. One night, Ruth stirred a pot of plain water for an hour, smiling as if it were jollof. When Mercy took the spoon, Ruth finally cried, childlike, broken. Mercy didn't cry back. She held her and repeated, "I'm here," like a prayer. Eventually, Ruth stopped recognizing her daughter, calling her the girl. One day, dressed in her wedding wrapper, she declared she was going to see Gabriel and walked barefoot into the street. It took neighbors to bring her home. After that, the door was locked, the key hidden. Mercy, exhausted beyond her years, bathed her mother, dressed her, combed her hair. Sometimes Ruth laughed, splashing water like before. Sometimes she screamed, called the water poison, accused Mercy of trying to kill her. On those days, Mercy sat soaked on the floor, whispering, "Tomorrow will be better." But it rarely was. The morning the final letter arrived, the sun rose gently, as though afraid to disturb the silence already swallowing the Olayemi home. Ruth had not moved from the floor since the night before, barefoot, muttering to herself, a broken spoon clutched like a holy relic. Mercy no longer tried to pull her back when she got like this. She just worked around her, protecting John from the worst of it, and offering quiet company where words failed. When a man in white shirt handed her the envelope from the farm, he couldn't meet her eyes. Mercy already knew what it meant. She had begged them for more time the week before, only to be met with clipped sympathy and firm business speak. Ruth was a liability. No severance. No help. The letter gave them 7 days to vacate the company house. That evening, Mercy sat beside Ruth, who was humming a hymn off key, and whispered, "We have to leave this place." Ruth didn't respond. John kept drawing silently on old cardboard, and Mercy's world shrunk to the slow folding of clothes and the unbearable quiet of goodbye. In the days that followed, Mercy packed what little they could carry. Ruth wandered through the market arguing with ghosts and collecting trash as if it were treasure. John, once wild with imagination, had grown quiet, trailing behind Ruth with wary eyes. On the 6th day, company men came with a lorry. When Mercy asked for more time, they shrugged. She gently woke Ruth and told her it was time. Ruth smiled and said Gabriel would carry them. Mercy said nothing. They left carrying plastic bags, memory, and grief. That night, they found a bench outside a church and made it theirs. Ruth hummed to herself, curled around a plastic bag. John rested his head in her lap. Mercy sat awake, watching stars she no longer believed in, guarding them through the darkness. She didn't cry. There was no space left for that. She just held their small world together with both hands and whispered to herself, they had survived worse. But she knew. This was a different kind of storm. Morning life on the streets was brutal. There were no birds or broom sweeps, only shouting conductors, honking buses, and the stink of neglect. Mercy woke stiff from sleeping near a mechanic's shed, beside Ruth's growing pile of collected junk. She didn't wake John. She watched strangers pass by, practiced being invisible, and mapped out how to feed her family with the coins she had begged the day before. Selling pure water in traffic was war. Dodging cars, yelling louder than chip sellers, racing lights. But it was her only way to survive. She ran not just for food, but for dignity, for soap, for sanity. Ruth was barely present now. Some days she sat mumbling and stringing bottle caps like beads. Other days, she screamed and accused Mercy of being a thief or witch. Mercy never cried anymore. She waited patiently, fed her mother and whispered, "It's me, Mummy. It's your Mercy." And sometimes, only sometimes, Ruth's eyes would clear, and she'd smile that crooked smile and whisper back, "My Mercy." And Mercy would carry on, broken all over again, but still standing. John had grown quieter. He no longer asked questions about school or when Ruth would be normal again. Instead, he became Mercy's silent partner in survival, cleaning her slippers, carrying bags, and most of all, watching over their mother when Mercy worked. He knew the signs of her episodes, how to steer her away from roads, how to gently remind her of better times. Remember Papa's blue radio? Mercy often saw them from afar, Ruth's hand in John's, their silhouettes framed against the Lagos sunset. It broke her heart to see him forced into maturity, but it also gave her hope. If John could endure, maybe they could all make it. Nights were the worst. They rotated sleeping spots, behind kiosks, near train tracks, always alert, always ready to move. Mercy slept lightly, keeping Ruth close and John closer. Sometimes Ruth wandered off. Mercy would find her blocks away, talking to shadows. She never scolded her. Just said, "Let's go home, Mummy," and walked her back. She kept a rope to mark boundaries where they slept, not to restrain, but to create the illusion of safety. It was the only protection she could afford. The days were hot, the streets brutal. Mercy sold pure water under the hammering Lagos sun, her body lean from hunger, her eyes sharp from years of survival. She and John worked in sync, her with water sachets balanced on her head, him clutching a black plastic bag of chin-chin for resale. They rarely spoke. They didn't need to. They communicated in glances, reading each other like maps. She ran across roads shouting, "Cold water!" Dodging buses, balancing grace and danger. At noon, they rested under the mango tree. Mercy counted their earnings while John split the chin-chin, always giving her the biggest piece. His t-shirt hung off his bony frame, his eyes always scanning. Mercy was tired. Tired in her bones. Tired in her spirit. She dreamt of her father's voice, of puff-puff and laughter. But each time she woke, she was still on concrete, still in the same battle. Yet that day under the mango tree with coins tucked in Mathew's gifted pouch, she didn't know something rare was approaching. Kindness, gentle and unexpected, was on its way. The black SUV didn't draw Mercy's attention at first, just another fancy car in Lagos traffic. But when its window rolled down and a man behind sunglasses whispered her name, the world seemed to pause. "Mercy Olayemi," he repeated, stunned. "Gabriel Olayemi was my boss." The man, Mathew, stepped out gently, no rush, as if approaching a sacred memory. He looked at her with reverence, recognizing her as her father's bright star. John stood protectively nearby, his wary eyes softening when Mathew recalled Gabriel's stories about them. When Mathew asked about Ruth, Mercy hesitated before pointing toward an alley where their mother now drifted through days, building sculptures from plastic spoons. "She's not well," Mercy admitted, her voice cracking. Mathew didn't press. Instead, he simply asked to sit and talk. Mercy, trembling, followed, her first act of surrender in years. That night in the guesthouse Mathew arranged, Mercy experienced stillness for the first time in forever. The room was modest, but to her it felt sacred. Walls painted sky blue, a fan humming overhead, and hibiscus swaying outside the window. She helped John wash, then cried silently in the shower. Ruth, still caught in her own mind, was gently fed a warm meal by her daughter. Later, as John slept and Ruth hummed an old hymn, Mercy sat on the floor, watching the fan spin, afraid it might all vanish. But slowly, her body gave in, and she fell asleep without fear, for the first time since their lives had shattered. At dawn, Mathew knocked gently. "We'll go to the hospital later today," he said softly. Mercy opened the door, the weight of years in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. And he nodded, as if he knew those two words carried everything. At the psychiatric hospital, Mercy sat in disbelief as nurses gently guided Ruth away for evaluation. The pristine halls and comm staff felt a world apart from the chaos they'd survived. Ruth hummed quietly, compliant but distant, as if she existed in another world. Mercy wanted to run after her, but Mathew gently steadied her. Hours passed before a doctor returned with quiet hope. Ruth was malnourished, psychotic, but not beyond healing. Therapy, medication, and time could bring her back. That evening, Mercy, John, and Mathew returned to the guest house without her. The absence was sharp. Yet Mathew remained constant, providing meals, arranging classes for John, and giving Mercy a leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said, reminding her that her father used to write, too. When Ruth finally looked up during a hospital visit and said, "You look like him," Mercy carried those words like treasure. That night, she wrote them down and smiled in the dark for the first time in years. When Ruth came home, the sky was tender, and the house Mathew had found radiated calm. Flower beds, fresh paint, quiet streets. As Ruth stepped from the car, she looked around slowly, taking in the bungalow like a dream. "Is this ours?" she asked. "Yes, Mummy," Mercy whispered. "It's home." Ruth touched her daughter's face and said, "You brought me back." Inside, the house was small but warm. 3 chairs, a framed photo of Gabriel and Mathew in younger days, cupboards full of food. Ruth moved slowly, fragile but present. John began smiling again. Mathew returned with textbooks and groceries, easing the weight Mercy had carried alone for so long. Ruth still had distant spells, but the silence was no longer a void. It was soft, alive, and holding them. In that house of new beginnings, Mercy watched her family come back to life. Quietly, gently, like a flame that had never truly gone out. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe to Triple C Stories. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section and stay tuned for more exciting stories.